Now, on Blackland, this is Black History Month. Here's some history. The year, 1928, Adolphus Stroud was good and fast, good enough to be included in the Olympic trials.
Unfortunately, despite that promise, they told him that, sorry, for whatever reasons, we can't allow you to ride on a train and we can't fund your travel.
It's always something. But he had to get there and determined he would. Travel with me to the 1900s and the story of the Stroud family. I'm going to let a descendant, Frank Shines, peel back the layers of his family. This Black family wasn't as we typically think in the South. They were in the West, Colorado Springs, Colorado. And Frank's grandfather, Tandy Stroud, along with his grandfather's older brother, Adolphus Stroud, were athletic, academically brilliant, and Black. Both ran track. Adolphus was real fast, so fast he was a contender for the Olympics. Hear his trial and his trip on Blackland.
And now,
as a brown person, you just feel so invisible.
That's not fiction. Where we're from.
Brothers and sisters, I welcome you to this joyful day.
We celebrate freedom. Where we are.
Get on the ground!
I know someone heard something.
And where we're going.
We the people means all the people.
The Black Information Network presents Blackland with your host, Vanessa Tyler.
There is so much Black history not in history books. And at a time when there are efforts to eliminate what little of our history is told, I have a story I'm certain you've never heard, but proves our courage and resiliency. Here to tell it is Frank Shines, who has the Stroud family blood running through his veins. Frank, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
The story of the Stroud family is fascinating. Let's start with Adolphus Stroud. Take us right back to 1928.
Yeah, sure will. So the family moved in 1910 from Indian Territory to Colorado Springs, and that's where Adolphus grew up. And in 1928 is the time when he decided that he was going to make a run for the Olympics. And so he began to train. He was not allowed to train or even work out on the high school track or with a high school track team. So the coach, a white coach, gave him a regimen and showed him how to do some basic stretching and exercises and training, and then told him to run up and down Pikes Peak, which is the largest summit there in the Colorado Springs area, about 14,000 feet. So that's how he began to train. And in June of 1928, he won the Rocky Mountain Region Olympic tryouts for the 5K race. That automatically qualified him for the Olympic trials to be held at Harvard Stadium in Cambridge. Unfortunately, despite that promise, they told him that, sorry, for whatever reasons, we can't allow you to ride on a train and we can't fund your travel.
Not surprised. So he had everything he needed, but there was always the obstacles.
Exactly. And of course, his coach said, listen, you've done your best. And his parents and the family, confided in him and said, hey, let's just get ready for Colorado College. And he said, no, let me spend the weekend. I'm going to go up to the mountains, as he often did. And he went up to the Rocky Mountains and thought about it over the weekend, came back down and had made his decision that he was going to make it one way or another. And so he set out on foot a few days later on June 25th at 4 a.m. with a 40-pound backpack, a golf club, and $10 in his pocket.
Wow. So here he is, a teenager in the 20s, a Black man.
Right.
Going, 2,000 miles from Colorado to Harvard University, where these Olympic trials were?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And at that time, his brother had been writing things and been involved with anti-lynching because that was a big issue. So obviously the family was very concerned about his safety for that reason.
I was going to ask you, how dangerous was it for a Black man to be traveling across the country like that? Yes,
extremely dangerous. And at that point, there were only about less than 20% of Americans even had cars. So he was hoping he might get a few rides, but of course that made things even more dangerous out on the roads. And he encountered a lot of violent people. He also encountered a number of people who were very helpful and helped him along in a lot of different ways. He came across a lot of wild dogs at night, and he had to run up trees and things of that sort. So it wasn't an easy going, that's for sure.
Was it any kind of like underground help, maybe from black home to black home? I mean, where did he sleep? Where did he eat?
Mostly outside, many times in cemeteries along the way, parks. But yeah, he found every once in a while he would find a black family. In fact, many times when the weather got particularly bad, storms and so forth, he would knock on doors and ask if they would let him in or let him just sleep at the back with the barn with the animals. And they would say, no, go down the road. There's a black family somewhere down there, another 5 miles. And so he would walk on and, be difficult to find those black families. At that time, there also obviously wasn't much communication of any sort. And so things were happening by telegram. One thing that did happen is once he arrived outside of Chicago, he got news that someone on the road said, they want you to stop by the station. And he goes, well, what station? They said the news station. So it was the Chicago Daily News. He stopped by there and they did a quick interview, communicated information, and then put out in all the newspapers. This gentleman, Dolphus Stroud, is making it for Olympics and gave him a sign to put on his back when he was walking. And that's when he started to getting rides. And that's when a lot more black folks along the roads and so forth helped him. But people of all colors and genders and races helped him after that point.
Wow. So he finally makes it. What happens then?
Yes. So 12 days later, he arrived just 6 hours before the start of the race. And during those 6 hours, he writes in his notes, I spent those in the 3 blocks. 2 hours putting on, a black man putting on a red, white, and blue. He took a lot of pride in that. The reason he went across is he said it was for 3 things. His family, the Rocky Mountain region, and people of color around the world. And so when he put on the uniform, he had a lot of pride in that. And then he said he was just so tired, he wanted to stay awake, and that was the only thing he could think about. So he walked along the corridors of Harvard Stadium. He had been accepted to Harvard in 1925 when he graduated from high school as the valedictorian, number 1. However, he couldn't afford to go to the college. So when he was there on the campus for the first time, he went through the library. He hoped about winning the Olympics, making it to the Olympics, winning the Olympics, and being able to afford to go to Harvard. And then the last third of the time, the last 2 hours, he spent just trying to stay awake, warming up, and being ready for the race. The gun went off.
What happened next? 1925, black man Adolphus Stroud walked 2,000 miles. He was good enough to make it to the Olympic trials, but the color of his skin prevented him from getting the funding like the others on the track team and traveling, resting on a train ride there. He walked. He was exhausted. Could he pull it off?
He said he went to run and his legs wouldn't move. He felt like he was running in mud and cement. And all of a sudden, he noticed people starting to pass him. Eventually, he made it through 6 laps before he finally collapsed from malnutrition and exhaustion.
Wow. But at least he made it, and at least he ran the race.
That's right.
You mentioned Harvard. The people back home in Colorado couldn't really deny his athletic ability, and they couldn't deny his intelligence. Talk about how intelligent Dolphus was.
Yes, interestingly enough, and when I first began to understand the story, I didn't know the story of my family, to be quite honest with you, which was really an unfortunate thing as for many of us African Americans and even others. But growing up, at the time, Oakland, California had one of the highest crime rates in the country. So we were on welfare with my 4 younger sisters. And my mom, unfortunately, she had part of the family from my grandfather's side had received some sort of ailment, and they eventually thought it was originally schizophrenia or some forth. They ultimately found out it was Huntington's disease. And And because of that, I never knew my family story because my mom was not always coherent and I couldn't understand half of what she's saying, whether it was true or not, and so forth as a kid. So consequently, I didn't know about this until I was in Colorado Springs and I got a phone call from my Aunt Lulu there at the Air Force Academy. And so that's when she had asked me, she goes, so how's it going at the Air Force Academy? I've been trying to reach you for the last 3 days. And I said, yeah, I was in survival training. She goes, so how'd it go? And I said, well, I won. Out of all the cadets, I got the top awards. And she goes, what else are you doing there? So I said, I'm on a gymnastics team and so forth. She goes, do you know where that comes from? And I had no idea what she meant by that. She goes, do you know about your grandfather, Tandy, and the history of Dolphus here in Colorado Springs? And that's when I began to understand just how prolific both of them were as athletes, as scholar athletes. Tandy graduating #2, Dolphus graduating #1. And so I said, okay, there's something going on here. It isn't just them. Katie, their father, was born and raised on a Texas plantation up until age 19. Then they made it to Indian Territory, where he married a Creek Nation Indian lady by the name of Lulu McGee, my great-grandmother. But while he was there, he helped build Langston University. He attended Langston University. He studied under the tutelage of an attorney. And so when we went to Colorado Springs, what the children would tell us later was that they were happy to go to school because the tests in school were so much easier than their father KD's. So that is really where it came from. He believed in education. He taught it to the children. He forced them to read books. They had encyclopedias. They had a piano. They had trombone. They had a violin in the house. And so I think it came from a lot of that. He had 2 older siblings who I'm certain also passed on knowledge to him as well as he prepared to enter high school. But he was just super gifted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, your family is fascinating. Just to make sure, for clarification, Dolphus had a brother, Tandy. That's who you're referring to.
That was my
grandfather. Okay.
Yeah, so Tandy was Dolphus's younger brother, and they competed. They really competed both in the classroom and on the field. In fact, a couple of years after that race, Tandy was winning the Denver Marathon, and he collapsed less than a mile and a half from the finish line, and Dolphus was right behind him, of course, and Dolphus went to help him. He goes, "No, make sure Stroud wins the race. I'll be okay." And they found him at the hospital several hours later. But Dolphus ended up winning that race against many of the people he had competed against in the Olympics. So yes, the family story is as I got to learn more about it, and I spent time with my grandfather when he was 83. I spent some time back in California, where he was living at the time when I was in pilot training, and that's when he began to tell me a lot more of the stories.
What was it in them? You mentioned their parents, but to make them fight and hold on to have a place in this world, it couldn't have been easy. I know it wasn't easy.
Right. Yeah. In fact, what Nina told us. So Nina is we call her the professor of the family, Nina, because her real name was number 9 is what they originally called her, because they couldn't keep up with all these kids. So she was the 9th of the 11 children. And so she was in California. She was an adjunct professor at UC Berkeley. And she was the first Black teacher, public teacher in Colorado Springs school district. And so she kept a lot of the history of the family that I later found out about. And she said that the parents, that Lulu and Katie, would force the kids to be competitive. And so, and they wanted that for them because they knew how difficult it was going to be for them when they went outside of the family. In a prominently white, almost all white elementary school, Bristol school, and now Colorado Springs High School, Palmer High School now. So that's the way they prepared them. They made sure they are very competitive. They forced the older children to teach the younger children. And they every day at the dinner table, KD would say, okay, who had the smartest event in class today? And they would all kind of vie for, okay, I did this, or I learned this, or whatever it was. So it was a lot of internal rivalry.
I think about, a Black family in Colorado. It just seems very unique. But talk about the roots from Africa. How did they even get to Colorado?
Yeah, so this part of the story is it's actually just so fascinating, and I confirmed it through my own DNA analysis with 23andMe as I was trying to really piece together everything. So my father's side of the family is from Nigeria. The Shines, the Strouds are from Ghana, and in 1842, an African girl was born, I believe in Georgia, to the Stroud plantation there, and they separated her from her parents. And ultimately, she ended up on what was called Pleasant Retreat. It's actually in the Library of Congress, associated with June 10th as a seminal event on June 10th. That Stroud Plantation in Limestone County, Texas, is where she grew up and was born in 1842 in Georgia. And she apparently created a lot of incidents. She was very strong-willed. And at one point, they beat her quite extensively, and she had scars on her back. And there's stories in the family about the head of the household, a young lady who had done this. But the plantation owner, Mandred, had an affair with a Tawakoni Indian, Native American Indian. And 9 months later, this child shows up on the doorstep at the plantation, at the big house, and everybody's wondering what's going on. And he had to confess about the affair he had to his wife. And so they ostracized this kid. And so he primarily lived with the slaves, with the Africans. And when he grew older, and this was by now right around 1865 time period, he wanted to marry that young lady, the African slave, Kimball, my great-great-grandmother. And so that's kind of the story of how things happened. Because of all the racism and all the violence there, Mandred then decided, I'm going to move you guys, he called it out of the country, to Indian Territory, because Indian Territory was considered, a different country, right? So he helped them move to Indian Territory, and that's where Dolphus then began to thrive. Under the tutelage of the professors and the teachers there at Langston University.
Wow, we are speaking with Frank Shines, a descendant of the incredible Stroud family, a Black family that fought hard to overcome the obstacles of racism. In fact, Dolphus Stroud in 1928 made it to the Olympic trials, but he had to get there, and of course, they wouldn't pay a Black man's transportation across the country, so he walked 2,000 miles. I wanted to ask you, how did he get back to Colorado after participating?
Wow, that's a great question. Almost no one ever asked that question. They always say, well, what happened? They don't know what happened, and that was it, right? I give them the cliffhanger. Oh, he arrived there 6 hours before. This was the most fascinating thing. He talked about in his notes how he was hallucinating even during at different points during the walk out, during the march, the journey out from Colorado to Cambridge. And he said that, before he finally fainted during the sixth lap, he said that he just thought, maybe I can make it. And then he fainted. And then he said he woke up and he was talking to this guy, Joey Ray. Now, Joey Ray was the seminal long distance runner of the time. Had won all of these great world championships, and everyone knew about Joey Ray. Well, he was talking to this gentleman. He wasn't sure who it was. And this gentleman asked him, well, tell me your story. How'd you get here? And, I saw what happened back there. He had just assumed, apparently, that this gentleman had spoken with him right after the race. It literally was 2 hours later, because Joey Ray, I found out later, his race was 2 hours later on the same track. So Dolphus must have laid there just completely out of it. And so when he later looked at these envelope, there's an envelope that Joey Ray had left him. And only then did he understand that this was the great racer runner, Joey Ray. And there was an envelope and it said, I understand, you didn't have a plan for getting back. You only thought about getting here. Call this gentleman reach out to the executive director of the YMCA in Boston. And that's how he was able to spend the summer working at restaurants. They gave him lodging. He made a boatload of money, according to him. He bought a suit, and he was able to afford a first-class train trip back home. So that's how he ultimately returned back to Colorado.
Into a blaze of glory. And was Joey Ray Black or white?
He was a white gentleman, yes.
There is a photo that I saw on your website of the family. Oh, vintage. They're dressed to the nines. They look wealthy, proud, determined. Do you know which photo I'm referring to?
Yes, it's the iconic 1929 photo that was actually requested from W. Du Bois for the Crisis magazine. And so they sent out a photographer because they heard about the family, but they also heard that during that time, this Black family was flourishing because Katie Stroud had figured out a way to create a trucking company to haul ash and also to pick up garbage. So they created the first kind of subscription for dumps and trash there in the Colorado Springs area. And that's why the family was successful for that short period of time before, unfortunately, Katie came down with glaucoma. And at that time, they didn't have any way to cure it, so he became blind. But yeah, that was the story behind that iconic 1929 photo.
Beautiful photo. Your family is incredible, as I've said. There are so many relatives that you have and so many tangents and other stories. That's enough to do a documentary, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. It's called Running to Harvard. And I've got a great crew, award-winning crew, cinematographer Kyle Hatchett. We got Mike Pock, who's the historian, photographer, a longtime friend of the family, and great friend of all of Colorado Springs and Denver. And then the executive director, Ralph Michael Giordano, who's created many film festivals and other events, and just a great filmmaker in his own right.
Brag about yourself just a little bit more. You mentioned something about flight school. What's your background?
Yes, my background, as I mentioned earlier, by hook or crook, me and my older sister, my two younger twin sisters, they ended up dying prematurely, as did my father, my mother, for the reasons that we talked about earlier, associated with her health. But somehow my older sister and we made it out of the hood. At that time, because the way things were in California, my mother automatically received custody of us. So my father finally came back into our lives. We moved up to Washington State when I was 13 years old, went to school there. And then I just began to flourish academically, as well as athletically. Was on a gymnastics team, captain, honor society. I was a vocal jazz and cellist, and got to travel around competing in all of those different types of extracurricular activities. And because of that, the Air Force Academy ultimately gave me a presidential appointment to the Air Force Academy. I went there, learned to fly, studied management and engineering, and met the Tuskegee Airmen. And a number of other great people, whether it was the Kissingers or some of the presidents and vice presidents. It was just an amazing experience, the 4 years there, and was the captain and MVP of the gymnastics team. And so part of the reason Lulu was really curious was because she was trying to help me understand the connection between Dolphus, who had this aspiration for the 1928 Olympics, and here we are more than 60 years later, and I was competing and training against Olympic gymnasts there at the Air Force Academy and the Olympic Training Center. So that's my background. I went on to pilot training in Arizona, and then went on to work with the military doing management engineering, which is kind of a combination of industrial engineering and management consulting. And the military sent me to school, covered 75% of all of my graduate studies, and since then went on to travel around the world working with IBM and Ernst & Young. Lived in Brazil for over a year, and it's just been a really great experience. And I can only thank the family and the support of a lot of coaches and teachers, many of them Black along the way, who believed in me, and then later began to understand, how to believe in myself after I understood more about our family history.
And what a history it is. And you were recently reunited with a sister?
Yes. Oh boy, you've done your research. So yeah, this is kind of emotional. I apologize, but when we were separated from my mother had a young daughter, Margaret, and had just become pregnant with a younger sibling, a son. Her son would have been my younger brother. but we never met them because we were separated. And so Margaret, who we knew like, at age 2, we searched everywhere. Me and my sister searched after we graduated from high school and college, and we just could not find out what had happened to Margaret. And about 3 years ago, she was looking, she found Stroud family. She saw another iconic photo of Lulu Stroud, of a little baby sitting in a chair, and one of her friends says, "That kid looks just like you and you're a little baby." She goes, "No, I don't think so." And she looked around and she saw my name and saw Shines, and she goes, "I think this may be my family." And so I got an email, and I gave her a phone call. We started talking, and sure enough, her name had been changed to Lisa, but the little 2-year-old Margaret, 44 years later, I got her on a plane to show up for the opening of Race the Opera, which we performed there in Colorado Springs at the Pioneers Museum. She attended that to a sold-out audience. She was sitting right in the front, and we opened and provided the whole backdrop for, an African slave who had this vision to write a song called Anthem of Heaven. And now it's being featured as part of Race the Opera, and some of that music will be included in the documentary. So yeah, that's how we were reunited 44 years later.
Amazing. Now, your family also has the honor of having a display at Colorado College. That must be great, and certainly another proud moment for the Stroud family.
Yes, it is. And I got a phone call just before COVID in December of 2019, and it was the president of Colorado College. She knew of the work I had been doing as a family historian, and invited me as well as a number of other people out. And they didn't really explain what was going to happen. And then we were met with the press and all the honors around what they created, which is called the Stroud Scholars. And we've since have brought in, I guess, 4 different cohorts of children. I shouldn't call them children, young adults from high school all the way up through college level through the program. And that first cohort is now in their sophomore year in colleges around the country. And then they also dedicated the VIP floor, the 4th floor of the Robeson Arena, a new arena that was created in Colorado Springs on the campus. They dedicated that to Dolphus and the family as well. So it was a pretty powerful series of days and events that took place.
How can people learn more about your fascinating family? It's just so many layers. It's just amazing. And when will the documentary be revealed?
The documentary will be revealed later this year. And right now we are on target for it happening just before the Olympics in July, knock on wood. And best way to reach us is just go to RunningToHarvard.com. Or if you want to look at Stroud Family of Colorado, just search Stroud Family Colorado, and you'll see our website come up, StroudFamilyColorado.com or RunningToHarvard.com. And
finally, what's the message you want our people to take away from your family's story?
Yeah, I didn't see people like me in the textbooks. I didn't see people like me in most of the prestigious positions growing up in Oakland, California. I believed, and was excited about the Apollo mission. I had no idea that Jack Stroud, my great uncle, was the gentleman who wrote the formula to safely return astronauts from the moon to Earth. So how many other hidden figures are out there that we don't know of? My hope is there are 2 questions I often get when I talk about the family, go out in public speaking and so forth. One is, wow, what an incredible family. But the other is, how did you do the background and research to find your family? On the Shine side of the family, we can't find hardly anything. We've been lucky on the Stroud side of the family that we've had some great people. So the message would be, believe in all of us. The stories that are out there are incredible. And I wish everyone well, and hope that perhaps in a small way, we're in a presidential election year, we're in an Olympic year. My hope is that perhaps this untold Olympic story might just help to heal our nation as well, because we certainly need to find a way to work together better and reduce the polarization.
Thank you. As we celebrate Black History Month, this is Black History We Need to Know. Frank Shines, producer of the documentary Running to Harvard, thank you for keeping this legacy alive.
Next time on Blackland with Vanessa Tyler, what is it about true crime that has us hooked? We're going